Thanks, Sid. It's a pretty hard act to follow. Do I get a musical accompaniment?
Oh, good. Just give me a second. Oh my goodness. Forgot to introduce you. I have to admit that usually when I do these introductions and things, I have things written out for me and people are chasing after me to get it right and make sure that there's a rundown. This says something because I did my own rundown. So, Karen Lee, I'm sorry, I should have introduced her properly. And Karen was born in Vancouver and grew up under her socialist parents, Wally Lee, who ran China Arts and Crafts at 33 East Hastings, and Lil Ma, who worked for leftist lawyer Handy Joe in the Ford Building on Main and Hastings. In between going to BC Royal, Hong Kong Cafe, Ming's, the New Diamond, and the Orange Door, Karen was a child of Chinese Freemasons, as her father was head of the athletic club, and she was part of the Northern Line dance team. In her youth, she sang socialist songs, joined in the protest against the destruction of Chinatown, and was a teenage participant of the Chinese-Canadian identity movement in the 1970s. She loves Chinatown and her family's past in the history community here too. It's the reason that she continues to make films about Saltwater City. Ham Sui Fa. Ladies and gentlemen, Karen Lee.
Thanks for the second introduction. I'll just talk to you. This is rather bright. It's really hard to see here. What Sid read to you about my background is actually true, and I really want to thank Sid and everybody at the Heart of the City Festival for inviting me to be here. It's a real honor, especially to talk about Ham Sui Fa, or Chinatown. And one of the things that was really nice is that there is something that recognizes what Ham Sui Fa is, because that's the kind of Chinese that I heard when I was growing up. And I remember when I was in university, I asked some of my friends if they were hungry, and I said, "Ne wuki ma?" And they said, "Wuki, what does that mean?" And I said, "Well, that means, are you hungry?" in Chinese. And they said, "That's not Chinese." And then I realized, oh, I'm speaking a village dialect, and that village dialect that I'm speaking is from 150 years ago, and no wonder nobody understands what I'm saying. But as I got older, I realized that I was just a tiny speck of a Chinese person with Chinese culture, and in fact there was a whole huge other land out there that was called China. And even though I thought I was Chinese and everybody else thought I was Chinese, actually I really wasn't very Chinese at all. So this whole subject of Ham Sui Fa and being Chinese Canadian has always been very interesting to me. And the other thing that I also noticed when I was growing up was when we were quite young, and this way of acknowledging being on Coast Salish territory, that a lot of the words that my family used were Chinook jargon words. And Chinook jargon was a trade language that they used here on the West Coast that was comprised of Chinese, Polynesian, French, German, English, a lot of different languages. And it was a trade language for people to communicate with each other. So we actually had an intercultural language that everybody used before English became the dominant language. And all these little things that I didn't know when I was growing up, and I finally got enough brains to try and figure out what was going on. It was really nice to find out this kind of information. So a lot of my films actually investigate the history that we don't know about, or the history that was unspoken. Certainly in the Chinese community, nobody told me that there was an anti-Asian riot here in 1907, and lots of other things that I didn't find out until much later. So the first film that I'm going to show you is called Shattered, and it was an installation that I created in in 2007 on the 100th anniversary of the anti-Asian riots. And I had 2 installations, one on Powell Street in Japantown and one in Shanghai Alley on Pender Street. So I'll show that to you first.
Somebody gonna use the mic?
Come here.
Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada's 3rd city, just a few miles north of the U.S. border. Yesterday, a branch settlement on the edge of nowhere. Today, one of the most beautiful cities in North America and the busiest seaport on Canada's Pacific coast. So young, her story is still being written, but old enough to have developed a personality that is all her own.
哎呀，個加蘭嗰創起啊，加蘭嗰富起啊，要夾㗎嘛就係。
停得耐，唔使提操動。
喂，咁就高，夾住我咧，儲起嘛，要夾㗎嘛就係，就都打我打翻落啊！
一個按嘅你又會啊！哎呀，
我要你闖啊！阿長叔，邊嚟嘅闖邊個啲？我打個做好貴㗎，打先條絲卡仔，貴咗打先有。
係咪唔好攰啊嘛？每隻喺住我咁翻嚟嘅話，佢哋呢個鳩立立亂啦。由此即係而家通知市政府咧，市政府已經派出咧機車嚟㗎啦。
得綠椅也蝦我得紅嘅，啲絲龜佬也蝦我得紅嘅。我講你聽話念聲喎，得綠椅嘛，活燒爛面嘛，你只能吞啊！
市政府已經應承啊，保護埋啲財產㗎啦。呢堆現同太多杯嘢，我哋有冇計啊？
差唔多交晒咯。
我幾間移民都唔係啊，啲人有兜啊。
我唔交喎。
唉，佢好危險㗎，你買咗兜啊？
我撩開佢。
你全家人喺絲龜佬手攻擊我得紅人嘛，就想日正呢演唔會嘛，就到日正呢日不真人嘛。我講你聽啦，我哋用我否則就係啦。我哋政府啊，冇科文我哋年前啊，我會學掉，我去打埋絲龜佬。
快上晒啲貨，頭先冇乜嘢做咯，係咪？你唔好攞到去飲啊，要有能地依鬧啊！
好滿意喎，我一定要報銷，唔係嘅咩？人多都有訂來，我一定要報銷，咩話？
The tension seems to have built up again in the first decade of this century. The famous Vancouver riots were in 1907, I think.
What can you tell us about these riots?
They were not directed solely against the Japanese, of course. They were both against the Japanese and the Chinese. And there had been a certain increase in immigration just in those few years, but they did lead to a number of non-Oriental to Occidental mobs storming Chinatown and Japantown in Vancouver at this time, and fighting back with bottles and sticks and stones. And there was a great deal of pillage and destruction. And it was as a result of this that the Japanese government and the British government came to a quota agreement, the so-called gentleman's agreement, by which Japanese migration to BC was restricted.
残機の中にも奴らと戦いたいと言って加勢してくる連中はいる。ちょっと待て。騎馬警官がボートの連中を抑えてくれるはずなんだ。